So, a fast-changing development finance landscape is no novelty. What is less known, however, is what this means for recipient countries' governments. There are certainly many more financing options developing countries' governments can access compared to a decade ago. This is what we called an age of choice for development finance at the Overseas Development Institute, and we ran a project for the past 5 years looking at these issues. What we know little about is the extent to which partner countries' governments can access this larger set of development finance flows to support the national strategies, and in particular the challenges they face in managing greater fragmentation and complexity. Let me focus on the case of Chinese development finance, highlighting two different findings that are particularly relevant for this debate. The first one is China should play a much bigger role as a development partner, and the second point is about the characteristics of Chinese development finance meeting the preferences of developing countries' governments. Let me go to the first point. First, some emerging donors, notably China, have a much bigger role at the country level than the global figures would suggest. This means that countries like China should take a much bigger role and more active role, not only at the country level, but also at the global level. When we look at the kind of series of development finance flows, in particular the external ones, that governments can access beyond official development assistance, at the global level, compared to other sources, assistance from China is fairly small. But when we take the lenses of recipient countries' governments and we look at the flows at the country level, the picture becomes very different. Again, if we consider all the different sources of external finance beyond official development assistance that government can access, at the country level, on average, in the countries that we reviewed, China provides on average 50% of these flows, with peaks of more than 70% in countries like Cambodia, Laos, and Ghana. For instance, in the case of Kenya, Chinese development assistance is as big as the African Development Bank, and China is the largest creditor to the Kenyan government. And as a kind of final example, in subsectors like energy, railway, and roads, Chinese official finance is by far the largest source to sub-Saharan Africa. This would suggest a much bigger role for China to be played at the country level. At the moment, Chinese officials do participate in country coordination mechanisms, both at the high level and also at the technical level. But their participation is rather passive or as an observer. And we believe that Chinese officials should play a much bigger role in these mechanisms at the country level. Let me go to the second and final point. There are several concerns about potential competition of new sources of development finance and potential implications, raising down to the bottom when it comes to kind of project standards. But Chinese development assistance, and in particular its characteristics, do match the preferences expressed by developing countries' governments for the terms and conditions of development finance. Development partners, to stay relevant and increase the effectiveness of their development assistance, should meet partner countries' preferences for development finance. The government officials that we interviewed over the past 5 years in the context of this particular ODI project express a series of preferences. First of all, they want more finance, especially to support infrastructure development. Second, they want projects that are led and owned by their own departments. So they should be demand-led projects. In the jargon, we talk about ownership of development programs. Third, programs should fit with national strategies, so they should be aligned to national priorities. And the fourth and final point, projects should be delivered quickly. We use the kind of word speed of delivery to show development results as soon as possible. Actually, some government officials that we interviewed were actually willing to sacrifice more favorable terms and conditions to access finance more quickly. There were projects that were turned out because their implementation was taking too much time and it was too slow. And if we're thinking about this kind of characteristics, most of these priorities do reflect the characteristics and the modalities of Chinese development finance. Chinese development finance comes at large volume, It focuses on infrastructure development. It's demand-led, and it's kind of delivered very quickly. So again, just to kind of wrap up, in this kind of age of choice for development finance, certainly China should play a much bigger role than the global figures would suggest. And again, Chinese development assistance does meet the priorities that most developing countries that we work on express in terms of greater volumes of finance, speed of delivery, ownership of development programs, and alignment to national priorities.